Welcome. Today is the 28th day of Tishrei, the 30th of October, and we're continuing with our series of classes on the articles in our weekly magazine, Wonders. If you don't know where Wonders is, you can get it at patreon.com/Galeinai, Galeinai. It's a weekly magazine that we put out that's devoted to the teachings of my teacher, Rav Yitzchak Ginsburg. And this year we are focusing on Partzufim. Partzufim are basically Kabbalistic models, but the twist here is that whereas Kabbalistic models were usually used to explain the Zohar, to explain the structure of consciousness, of the higher supernal worlds, and many other things, what Rav Ginsburg does is he takes these models and he uses them to restructure phenomenon that are from other places, not necessarily from Kabbalah, also not necessarily always from Torah. The last class we had was about the color scheme, the colors of the rainbow. So that has some connection to Torah, but as we saw last time, but it's not directly something that's discussed in Torah. This time we are going to look at something that's directly taken from Torah, and it's very famous, or at least in our generation it's become more famous, the 7 Noachide laws. Now, where do these laws even come from? So first of all, we have to know that these laws are passed down as a tradition in the Talmud. Meaning, in other words, that it's even though there's one verse in our Parsha, in our Torah portion, Noach, this week's Torah portion, that tells us that whereas Adam and Eve were only allowed to eat vegetables, Noach and his descendants were allowed to eat from animals, and yet not to eat a piece of flesh from a living animal, meaning you can't take a piece of the flesh of an animal that's still alive. You have to slaughter it in some way or kill it in some way before you can eat its flesh. So even though that appears quite explicitly, the other 6 Noachide laws are not explicit in the Torah. So they were passed down as a universal tradition that the sages connected to certain verses in the story of creation, the story of creation of Adam and Eve, the dialogue between God and Adam and Eve. So the first thing we'll do is let's read what these laws are. And we're going to read this directly from the Talmud. This is from Sanhedrin 56a. And it says like this: the sages taught, and we're going to review it with Rav Steinsaltz's commentary so that it flows and is clear. The sages taught the descendants of Noach, that is, all of humanity, were commanded to observe 7 commandments, 7 mitzvot. The mitzvah of establishing courts of judgment, and the prohibition against blessing, which means blaspheming God, the name of God, and the prohibition of worshiping idols. And it's not just idols. People think about this as, well, only if you have some physical idol in front of you is that's forbidden. It's not just that. It's true that in the past, idols were the way in which people served gods other than God of creation, the God who is our source, who is everything. I tend to say that you can't really begin to understand your relationship with God until you understand that you are in some way also a part of God. You have to understand that. And you would never worship something that's so ridiculously outside of you as what an idol represents. And so there are also certain things that you can't worship because they just make no sense to you at all. So that would fall under the same prohibition of worshiping idols. It's a little delicate because by non-Jews, the problem of worshiping idols, or it's called idolatry, but again, it's a little bit of a misnomer, is a little bit more lenient than it is by how the Torah prohibits this for Jews. But we're not going to get into the details right now. We're just going over the 7 laws. And the prohibition against forbidden sexual relations, and the prohibition of bloodshed, and the prohibition of robbery, and the prohibition against eating a limb from a living animal. So those are the 7 laws, the 7 universal laws called the Noachide laws sometimes, that the Torah prescribes for everyone in the world. Now, we can find hints of them in the description of people who are not descendants of Abraham in the Torah. They're all hinted in one way or another in different contexts. We're not going to get into that. I do want to say that these are not really 7 laws that stand by themselves. They're more like 7 categories. And there are different counts of how many commandments they actually cover. There's one count that says that there's 30. There's another count which is a bit more expansive, and it goes up to 90-something, 93 if I'm not mistaken, commandments. And when you think about it that way, it's not on a completely different level than what the Torah demands of the Jewish people, which is, everybody knows, the 613 commandments, which really today have exploded into thousands and thousands. This is without even having the temple of things that we do that are related to these commandments. They don't necessarily have to be a commandment, but they are the outgrowth of these commandments. What I want to impress on us is that you can't have a relationship with God if you're not committed to following commandments. It's not a real relationship, in the same way that you can't have a relationship with a spouse if you say, well, you know, I'm just going to do my own thing and you do your own thing, and we're not related, and there's nothing that I am committed to you when you ask me to do it. Imagine that you would ask your spouse just even something simple, whatever it is. Don't tread with your muddy boots on the rug. And imagine somebody would just completely ignore you. And not just in a way of, you know, I forgot, I'm this, whatever. I'm talking about, like, really doesn't care and doesn't see that as part of a living, breathing relationship that marriage is made around, which is a commitment to one another. So yeah, there's no relationship there. The same thing is true with God. You can't really have a serious relationship, or a relationship that actually leads to something, that actually leads to some growth and to change, and to a enduring relationship between the two, unless there is an element of obligation. There has to be obligation. Without obligation, there's really nothing there. So this is, you know, the 7 Noachide laws is a little bit of a misnomer, because again, it expands to a lot more, and it really wants to impress on people that whether you're a Jew or you're not, relationship with God requires obligation. It requires an ability to commit to certain acts, to certain prohibitions, to do things and to not do certain things. With all that being said, still, this is the way it is known as the 7 Noachide laws. So what we want to do now is we want to naturally correspond these 7 laws to the 7 lower sfirot. And the sfirot, the channels of divine effluence from loving kindness to kingdom. And the way that this works, first of all, I want to encourage you to look at the article in Wonders magazine, or download it from the site from patreon.com/galeinai, Galeinai. But let's go over it quickly. The commandment that is related to chesed, to loving kindness, is a prohibition against adultery. So that's very clear. Chesed, loving kindness, is love, and prohibition against adultery is guarding our love, making sure that when we have a commitment with a spouse, it is not broken. That trust, that commitment, that relationship is not broken. As you'll see, 6 of the 7 commandments are prohibitions, which mean that they definitely guard something. So here we're saying that they guard the loving kindness, the faculty of loving kindness in our soul, in our ability to be a human. The 7th, which we'll see later, is also guarding something, but in a different way. Instead of doing it with prohibition, it's doing it with a prescription. So, The first one, as we said, chesed, loving kindness, is a prohibition against adultery. Gvura, which is might, is a prohibition against bloodshed, not to murder. And that's also very clear. Might, Gvura, even we saw that its color is red, so the prohibition against bloodshed is guarding our might. It's making sure that it's held in check. The third commandment is prohibition against robbery. And that we put in correspondence with tiferet, or beauty. And this is a very big topic that we're not going to be able to cover right now, but beauty is considered to be the body of the person. So if we correspond the 7 lower sefirot to our body parts, the right hand is loving kindness, the left hand is might, and the body itself is tiferet, is beauty. We translate this as beauty. You might see some other translations of the names of these sefirot. We think that this is the one that captures the most meanings in Hebrew, but obviously you can't capture all of them. In any case, the idea here is that a person's possessions are part of their body. That's the way the Torah sees it. The possessions are an extension of the self. And that's why possessions, especially to a person who's very pious and righteous, are very essential. And we even have laws around this, that if a burglar comes into your home, it depends on who the person is. Some people will just be happy to get away with their lives and be happy that nothing actually happened. A pious tzaddik, a truly righteous person, will be willing, strangely, again, it sounds like strange to us, why would you do this? Would be willing to put their life on the line to protect their possessions. And a burglar who comes knowingly into a house, knowing that there could be that there's a pious person there, is putting his life on the line. And that needs to be, there's a lot of discussion around this. So we could say maybe today people are not so possessive, but the point is that you don't know. You don't know whose house you're going into. And if it's a truly pious person, by pious here we mean someone who doesn't cheat, whose possessions are really bought with the sweat of their brow. And so the possessions become part of who they are. That person will be willing to risk their life to guard their possessions. In any case, tiferet, beauty, is the body of the person. And that's the idea here, that the prohibition against robbery is a prohibition that guards the body of the person himself. Next we have netzach, which means victory or eternity. It can be translated as both. And that's a prohibition against idolatry. And that makes a lot of sense because eternity only belongs to God. Anytime a person worships something else, they are worshiping something that is passing, something that is not eternal. So a prohibition against idolatry is really a protection of our sense of eternity. The next one is prohibition against blasphemy, which corresponds here to acknowledgement or hod. Sometimes we say this instead of acknowledgement, we say that this is thanksgiving. When you think of this as thanksgiving, you understand what blasphemy is the opposite of. Blasphemy is when you curse God, and thanksgiving is, of course, when you thank God. So the prohibition against blasphemy is protecting our feeling of being in debt and wanting to thank God for what we have. Now, a lot of people, when do people curse? They curse when they feel that they're not in debt, when they feel that they've lost something. But to protect our hod, to protect our faculty of thanksgiving, a person has to think about this long and hard. That as much as sometimes you lose things, could be something in your health, it could be something in your family, it could be whatever it is. This is how life is, and we have much to be grateful for. And so blasphemy is something that needs to not be part of our repertoire. And most people, after they blaspheme, when they calm down, they regret it because they see that life does go on. And you need to protect your faculty of thanksgiving. The best is like what the sages say, that you say a blessing, not just that you're not blasphemous, but you say a blessing over even negative things that happen to us in life. Unfortunately, in the last few weeks, we've been forced many, many times to say there's a blessing that's Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Blessed is the one who judges righteously, who judges truthfully, which we say after someone dies. And we've had many heads of beautiful families who have been killed in this war in Lebanon and in Gaza, and men of, some of them of learning, of scholarship, rabbis, and with 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 children. And every time that this happens, in the end, we say, blessed is God who judges truthfully. There is a judgment. We don't understand it. So that's the idea, that a person needs to say a blessing, not just not blaspheme, even after negative events. This is one of the hardest parts of faith. It's one of the hardest injunctions in Judaism, and there's a lot to say about it, and that's what we have time for right now. The sixth prohibition is against eating flesh from a living animal. This needs to be explained for a moment. Why would a person eat flesh from a living animal? So usually people don't go around, it's very uncommon, though I know that there are dishes like lobster or other animals that are cooked alive, and even or clams that are eaten when they're alive. I'm not very familiar with exactly how this works, but there is such a culture in the world. I think it even more exists in the Far East. The Torah says that this is not allowed. Why is this? Because the usual, really what this need to eat something that's alive is a catering to our impulsivity. To eat something that's alive is like to say, I can't wait until it's actually dead. I can't wait to cook it. I can't wait because my impulses, my needs are so strong. And this is related to the sphere of Yesod, foundation, which is also where the sexual organs are located. And the same ability to restrain ourselves when eating and fulfilling our craving for food has to be there and in place when it comes to our cravings for sexual contact. There are also many prohibitions that have to do with that. So that's a prohibition against eating flesh from a live animal. We put it here, and there's a very interesting point that Rav Ginsburg brings out. I want to just spend a moment on it, that the one commandment that Adam and Eve had, which was not to eat from the tree of knowledge, was actually the precursor to this prohibition of eating flesh from a live animal, because that too was to guard their impulsivity, to restrain it. Because, as we understand, God said, on the day that you eat from it, you will surely die. Not, if you take this literally, and even figuratively, not if you wait, not if you have the ability to restrain yourself for long enough. How long? Just until the day passes. And if they would have waited, they were created on Friday, if they would have been able to wait for just 3 hours, it says, and the Shabbat, the seventh day, would have come in, it would have been permissible for them to eat from the tree of knowledge. It was just a test of whether they could restrain their impulsivity. That needs to be expanded a little bit more, but that's the general idea. Finally, we come to the injunction. Here we have a prescriptive commandment to establish a just legal system, to establish courts, because you can't have any society that does not base itself on a judicial system. Justice has to be above everything. When you ask what's more important, we have this problem here in the modern state of Israel about what's more important, the legislative branch or the judicial branch. There's no question in the Torah that the judicial branch is more powerful, in the sense that it should be able to reign supreme over the other branches of a government, even when it comes to a king. There's a lot of discussion in the Talmud why this was not practiced when there were kings that were not from the house of David, meaning the kings of the northern kingdom, because they were violent and unruly, and if the justice system would have tried to try them, then they would have killed them all, which actually happened a couple of times. So justice is the backbone of every single society. There has to be a very strong and just judicial system. And that we put in kingdom, because that is the backbone of every kingdom, of every society. So this has been a short review, more than our usual 15 minutes, but not much more, I hope. And I hope you join me tomorrow when I will review another parsuf that we have in this week's Parsha. And this one, I think, is one of the most interesting ones, because it's going to reveal a lot of things about Noah and God's relationship with him. But more importantly, it's going to show us how to learn Torah. How can you learn Torah when there are so many variant opinions among the commentaries? How can you understand what is right, what is wrong? How do we do this? And so that will be tomorrow. Thanks for joining today. Hope to see you. Bye-bye.